Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Center for Business Analytics lecture series. My name is Matt Libertor. I'm the director for the Center for Business Analytics. Today, we are fortunate to have a fantastic speaker in our midst, Dr. Michael Lowenstein from Market Probe. Michael is an executive vice president of Market Probe, a leading worldwide consulting and marketing research organization. He's the author of 5 customer-centric strategy books and over 150 white papers and articles. His most recent book, The Customer Advocate and the Customer Saboteur, was recently published in 2011. One of his books, One Customer Divisible, was devoted entirely to customer data and analytics. Warm to my heart. He has presented and conducted workshops at industry and professional conferences across the United States and in over 30 foreign countries for a variety of corporations with a list too long to mention. He's also lectured in a variety of MBA and EMBA programs at such schools as University of Pennsylvania, Penn State, New York University, and Columbia. He's broadly experienced in consulting and conducting research in B2B and B2C product and service industries. His particular area of interest is the impact of word-of-mouth communication and brand favorability on downstream customer behavior, employee commitment, and ambassadorship, and how organizations build trust and authenticity through customer centricity and use customer data in researching their strategic business goals. Michael holds a doctoral degree from the ISGI group within France, ESC Lille, an MBA from the University of Pittsburgh, and we're very fortunate to call him one of our alumni since Mike earned a BS in Economics and Marketing from Villanova University. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Michael Lowenstein.
It's great to be here. I'm kind of a frustrated lecturer professor, so this is going to be very, very interactive, trust me. And any questions that you have or anything that doesn't feel quite right, anything that doesn't look right, don't hesitate, fire away. We're going to be talking today about starting from a base of customer centricity and what that's all about, how it impacts customer analytics, business analytics, both of those that kind of forged in my mind, and what that means for organizations and how organizations really have had to evolve to be more contemporary in their use of data these days. So I'm going to touch on a number of areas. Matt already talked a little bit about me. I'm not going to bore you with this too much. I've had a passion for this for 35 or 40 years. And usually what happens is my passion overwhelms me. I end up writing a book, and if it's kind of a blip, then I do a white paper or an article or a blog. But I try to stay very current on this. And as Matt said, I'm really focused on what it is that drives customer behavior. And customer behavior ends up being sort of core to business analytics, as I hope to demonstrate. I'm going to start by taking you back about 30 years. I've got a number of profs in the audience today. We all look at management models, so do I. There are a lot of management models around. Jay Galbraith, for example, has something called the STAR model. This is the 7S framework. And this was created by Tom Peters and Bob Waterman before they wrote In Search of Excellence in 1980. While they were still at McKinsey. The first time I ever saw this was in a book called The Art of Japanese Management, when that was very hot. The 7 S's are very clear. Structure, everybody understands. Strategy, everybody understands. Skills are really what separates organizational management from everybody else. In other words, if I talk about LL Bean, for example, you would talk about their, what skills they have and what the kind of people that they bring into the organization, and that's staff. Style is the culture of the organization. Superordinate goals are really shared values. So those are the 7 S's. And in my world of customer centricity, where I focus, everything is focused here. I'm the customer. Everything has got to be focused here, on me as the customer. And for our purposes today, when we're talking about systems, which is really the flow of information, all kinds of information that you get one way or another about customers and product movement. So this is kind of my starting point. It all starts with customer centricity. Here's some examples, and this is hardly exhaustive, but these are some companies that I've identified one way or another as being fairly customer-centric. And we talked at lunch about Wawa. Wawa comes in there. I talked a little bit about Royal Bank of Canada, for whom we do a lot of work. RBC comes in here. Royal Bank of Scotland in Scotland does a great job. Any of these names not familiar to you? Yeah? Tesco, everybody know Tesco? World's largest supermarket chain. Has the most incredible loyalty program. There's a whole book that's been written about what they do with customer data called Scoring Points. They even bought the data management company called dunnhumby. Clive Humby started this company, and they do an incredible job. Harley-Davidson, everybody knows. QVC, a lot of people know. Target is amazing. State Farm is fascinating. Lego is probably the 4th largest toy company in the world. Unbelievable what they do with customers. They're bringing customers into the center of the organization. Harley-Davidson does it as well through their Harley owner groups, the Hog Clubs. And they bring these people in to help design the new bikes. So they are literally at the center of the organization. All of these companies are. We were talking about this at lunch, and one of the things that I said is that it's not necessarily that some industries are better at this than others. Some are. But it really is about finding the exemplars within the industry who do this well. Costa Coffee. Anybody know Costa Coffee? You know who they are? Yeah. Costa Coffee is the largest coffee house chain in the UK, bigger than Starbucks. And these guys can target promotions and know their customers much better than an organization like Starbucks. Now, there's a difference I should point out between organizations that we might identify as customer-friendly versus customer-centric. An organization like Nordstrom's, for example, and Starbucks, we would identify as customer-friendly. They're very outgoing, they do a lot of good things for customers, but in terms of customer centricity, bringing the customer into the center of the organization so they're part of the DNA, that's the next step they have to go to. These organizations have already done it. Okay, so I'm going to be talking principally today about customer advocacy and kind of where it came from and what it means to organizations as far as business analytics are concerned. It's very, very, very important. And what we find is, because I work with marketing research, product development, customer service, C-suite executives, we're always looking at these kinds of decisions, communications planning, touch point experiences. Obviously, this is all key. One thing I would also point out is we've got to be careful, and I'll say this probably a couple times during the course of the presentation. Company image and reputation is every bit as important these days as product and service. How do we know? All you have to do is look at BP. All you have to do is look at Toyota. All you have to do recently is look at FedEx. FedEx. 8 million people have seen that guy toss the monitor over the fence on YouTube. It's been all over the news. Now, they have tried to take care of it and really address it, but it definitely has hurt them in terms, and they compete directly with the Postal Service, with UPS. It has hurt them economically. So they have to be very aware of this. Product and service development, clearly. Customer relationships, strategic customer relationship building. Even things like brand messaging and positioning. What do you say about the product? What do you say about the service that's going to resonate with customers? How do you get to these messages? How do you define them? Even things like loyalty program development and refinement. I was saying at lunch that I've seen recent data on loyalty programs that some 60 to 80% of customers who are involved in loyalty programs really don't know much about them and don't think the company really cares. And so this becomes an issue for customers. They don't use it as much because they don't understand the programs, and the organizations don't understand because they never ask. They never refine the programs. So you're often getting components to these programs that may not work for you. They may even detract. So companies, this is all part of metrics. Companies need to understand this. Okay. I put a lot on this, mostly because I know people are going to look at it for reference. So I'm going to tell you the straight skinny about customer advocacy. It's pretty simple. Customer advocacy is kind of the highest level of relationship that an individual, whether it's in a B2B company or a B2C company, can have with an organization. It means that you are speaking positively and frequently about that organization, which also impacts, it's called self-perception, impacts your own behavior. Scientists have found out, social scientists have found out that when you talk positively, this also impacts your own behavior. And the flip side of this is customer negativism, customer alienation, customer sabotage. And it's all a direct result of your own personal experience. That's a core criterion. You have to have used the product or service in order to be able to be accepted as having some relevance. Yep. Okay. The other thing that I will mention at this point, again, we were talking about this at lunch, but I go to a lot of conferences, I see a lot of webinars where the entire emphasis is on social media. Social media has grown in importance dramatically. Online social media is particularly critical these days. You find organizations spending increasing amounts of their marketing budgets on informal social media. However, the bulk of communication that takes place, whether it's in business to business or business to consumer, and this doesn't matter even down to the Gen Y and millennials, still is offline. And so we have to be kind of agnostic in where this communication comes from. We'll track it if it comes online, but we really don't care where it comes from as long as it happens. So, what we find, though, is that it's tremendously influential. All right. So the difference between alienation and sabotage and advocacy is one is kind of the flip side of the other. What we find also is industry to industry, about 20% of customers, and this varies, by the way. We just recently did our second round of banking research in the United States, looking at the top 25 or so banks. And so the level of alienation can actually increase dramatically or shrink depending upon what the level of advocacy is. So what you're looking at is how much trust and openness and authenticity and honesty and belief and credibility are created between the vendor, whoever it is that you are buying from, and you. That's really what it boils down to. All of this is about trust. We're building on trust. Have any of you read The One-to-One Future? Don Peppers and Martha Rogers? A few of you have. Don Peppers, who's a very well-known consultant in this field, now talks a lot about trustability, And so, before I saw FedEx throw that monitor over the fence, I probably would have trusted them a lot more, like Tom Hanks coming out of being marooned for several years and delivering that FedEx package. That's the way that, my heart would have palpitated for FedEx, and I would have felt very good about it. Now I'm faced with all of that. British Petroleum, Toyota, we can go back. We can look at Enron. We can look at Global Crossing. I mean, the list is kind of endless. It was so impactful on Toyota that now General Motors has reclaimed its position as first place producer among automotive manufacturers. That's huge. That's huge. It's taken Toyota several years to come back. So alienation is very important. We have to measure it as a metric, just like we do at the top end, customer behavior. All right, why is it so important now? Well, what we hear from our clients is that they're putting an increased emphasis on getting the most bang for the buck out of all of their marketing dollars, whether it's advertising, promotion, online, offline, whatever it is. And what we see is that much of this is measured in fairly antecedent ways. You're still looking at satisfaction. When you're talking about services, I point out here, a lot of it is still around things like first call resolution. And what we find is that experience, particularly service experience, drives a very, very large proportion of the way companies are rated by individuals. So we are looking principally at brand favorability and also experience and purchase. Then we're also looking at social media, online and offline, and word of mouth. These are the principal influencers we have found of behavior, and we are hardly alone here. You know, I can speak to the fact that going back to 2000, you find organizations like Gartner and IBM, McKinsey, Accenture, a lot of consulting organizations have taken long, hard looks at this and where the decisions are influenced, how customer decisions are influenced. Everybody has kind of moved in this direction. I identify this as kind of a line of sight. And, you know, this goes back to the whole core concept of customer centricity. You know, so what we see is what we, you know, and again, this goes back to the fact that you will find exemplars and you will find companies that are striving to be at that level, and you will find also RANds, and then you will find companies really out of it in terms of what they do to provide experiences, to create competencies in customer management, how they develop products, how they use channels, what kind of mindsets ultimately they create and the behavior that they get. And then we're looking at the measurement. Now, ideally, what happens when you look at what they get as a result of dimensional research, we do qualitative, we do a lot of quantitative. That's dimensional because we can get segmentation and micro-segmentation when we're doing quantitative research. Now you come all the way back, and what you're endeavoring to do is influence process and style and just about all of those 7 S's that we've talked about, okay? So this to me is a you know, pretty good line of sight. I mean, I could have made this totally circular, you know, and ideally that's really what it is. What we believe is that if you look at the 7 S's and you really focus on systems, which I do, and that's most of my work, although I do work with companies, you know, to help them with their culture, actually to be more customer-centric in the way they use the data. It's almost all about the data and analytics. As Matt said, I wrote an entire book about this because I was so consumed with it at one point. And I'm going to show you a couple things that kind of led to my point of view. There's an organization, a consulting organization in the UK called Dedica. And Dedica has looked at the ways companies use information. So they said, okay, look, life pensions, travel, tourism and leisure, retail banking, energy and utilities, and telecom. Let's look at the kind of information that they collect. Order and billing details, contact history, comments and complaints. Then you get to third-party information, which is really what happens when you're doing market research, demographics and lifestyle or psychographic data. You can see that they start to really fall apart. And this is the UK. The same thing is true in the United States and, frankly, most places around the world. So in terms of the data that companies collect, again, you will find paradigmatic organizations, paragons, companies that are exemplary in this, that really do a good job, and then you will find companies, again, that really need to catch up, okay? If I look at kind of the line of what we do and what we measure and what many of our clients are into, you go back to the 80s and you were talking about TQ. We're still into Six Sigma. TQ is still a very important part of what we do, and you can't denigrate it at all. But in the 80s and the rise of the Baldrige Award, everybody was focused on quality. In the 90s, everybody was talking about satisfaction. In the late 90s, they started to talk about retention. My first book was Customer Retention. It looked at the difference between customer sat and customer retention, and it's dramatic. Then we started to talk about loyalty. Loyalty is really, I guess the way I would characterize it is it's the barrier to exit. What can you do as an organization to hold that customer in, to create enough perceived value that the customer doesn't really want to leave? That's loyalty. Now we've moved on because the shift has really taken place with the rise of the internet and mobile devices from the company to the customer. The customer now totally owns the decision, or almost totally owns the decision. I've seen stats. McKinsey was saying that, this is in 2010, that 20 to 50% of the decision influence was made by the customer himself or herself. I've also seen data in early 2012 that says that in some industries, this may be as high as 90%. In other words, the companies have now got to engage in the dialogue rather than own it. They got to have a partnership with customers rather than having all the information go one way. And this manifests itself in the kinds of metrics that you use and the way that you measure behavior. So this is kind of what we've seen. Now, I know we've got a market research professor in here. Where is she? There you are. Okay. So this will look a little familiar to you. Anybody else had much background in market research? Okay. Well, okay. So what we've seen is that after you got to about 2003, 2004, 2005, there hadn't been really a more contemporary way of understanding behavior. We go all the way back to satisfaction and the serve-qual model. Leonard Berry down at Texas A&M and two colleagues that came up with this. And we followed it through for about 30 years. And a lot of the models that I see around, and I've really looked at about 15 or 20 of them from my major competitors, some of them go back into the 90s, some even into the 80s. You got to be more contemporary because the decision environment, for lack of a better word, has changed so dramatically in the past few years. Okay, so, and here I just want to point this out. This was covered in my very first book. Now, you will know a correlation of 0.00 means, right. I first saw this at a conference in London in 2003. And actually, the guy who had put it together, a fellow by the name of Fred Reichheld, who wrote the book The Loyalty Effect and is behind the Net Promoter Score, he did this. And I was doing a workshop at this conference in London later on, and I had several guys from a telecom in northern Africa, and they said, my picture was in the brochure, so they came up to me after Reichheld's presentation, and they said, "Did you see this? Did you see this? What do we do now? We measure satisfaction. That's all we've been measuring for 15 years. You'll have to change. You can continue to measure satisfaction, but if you want more actionability and the whole notion of satisfaction being tied to something very tangible like growth, it isn't there." And these are actual scores from the American Customer Satisfaction Index. So Reichheld, when he did this analysis through Bain & Company, the consulting organization, everybody knows Bain now because of Mitt Romney, if you hadn't heard the name before. But, Bain is a big consulting organization, and Reichheld was the head of customer loyalty, and he had done this analysis, and this is what he was telling people. There's no correlation. That's pretty scary. In other words, the metric that you all have been using for 16 years is no longer working. You got to look at something else. So, this is just kind of by way of an incidental piece of news. Dedica, I'll come back to Dedica for a second. Dedica looked at the ways that really customer-centric organizations function with data. Insight, action, and optimize, and they said that's where most companies fail, okay? They're great at storage. Some are better at consolidation, CDI. Fewer are better at analysis. Fewer still are better at deployment. We're talking again about, chimney situations where data doesn't flow between departments. It flows up, may not flow down, certainly doesn't flow across. If you don't have a database that looks at product and service elements as well as incorporating customer information, you're going to have a challenge. And most databases don't. And so, companies have got to re-examine their database management systems. IT has got to be far more inclusive. But it starts with the organization. It really starts at the C-suite level, understanding that this is important. And so, what Dedica would say, and I agree, and I've seen their analysis, is that from here down, right? You know, a good way to think about customer centricity, by the way, from the standpoint of data management, and Forrester actually used this as a definition. It's a single integrated view of the customer across the entire organization. I'll say that again. It's a single integrated view of the customer across the entire organization. Up, down, sideways. If it doesn't exist, you're going to have a real challenge ever becoming customer-centric. And so they're saying that the failure is from here down and from here down. That's where it hurts. So now I wanted to take a little bit of a macro look at data as we were going through. So the key points of emphasis that I'm going to make, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, is what we're hearing from clients. And I've been hearing for years. By the way, part of my background, in addition to having, being at Market Probe now for a couple of years, I was with GFK, which was a top 10 market research organization, Harris Interactive, another top 10 market research organization, both in senior management capacity, senior vice president in customer management. So, I've been seeing this for just about every industry around the world, probably for the past 10 years, and it's increasing, increasing, increasing. They want accountability, and this absolutely applies to the metrics that are used. They want accountability, it's got to be relevant. You've got to be able to correlate performance to customer behavior and actual business outcomes. If you can't, and I just showed the data on customer sat, you got a problem. It doesn't correlate, so why measure it? So we're really talking about accountability. What's the return on customer investment? One way or another, this is where companies place their money, whether it's marketing or service or promotion, product development. One way or another, this is all return on customer, ROC. Where is your advantage within the market space? Where do you have vulnerabilities? Where do you have softness? All based on experience. And are we looking at the right kinds of things? Now again, if our base of evaluation is satisfaction, we're going to be challenged. Can the metrics then that we do use help us make the right decisions? Every company has several scarce resources: time, money, people, facilities, and technology. The whole name of the game is using the metrics to help make the best decisions with limited resources. Very clear, okay? So the big how-to is, I don't care the denomination, I don't care where you are in the world, is it possible to oh, we're going to go backwards. Yeah. Is it possible to demonstrate the impact of enhanced product, service, messaging, what have you, experience on business outcomes, and then take the right kinds of actions? And the answer is clearly yes. Well, this really comes from this decline in traditional advertising that I was talking about. It all started kind of in the late 90s with the rise of the internet, and now it's gone global. We no longer, by the way, in the United States have anything close to the highest level of population penetrated by the internet. You go to South, anybody been to South Korea recently? Okay. These people would die if you took away their electronics. The whole culture is just built around mobile electronics these days. Far greater penetration there, far greater penetration in places like Italy. So we're kind of getting pretty far behind. The rise in China, of course, as the rise of the middle class is absolutely astronomical. So we are starting to fall behind. So the rise of internet usage, internet availability has gone up dramatically. This also means that we have to look at different metrics. We have to look at personal experience. We have to look at what is it that builds trust between the vendor and the customer. We have to look at informal communication because it's so incredibly leveraging. And this leads us kind of to customer advocacy. I mentioned that I was with GFK. GFK acquired a company that is responsible for the Roper poll. And the Roper poll has been around as long as the Harris poll or ORC. And I'm losing these, it's got a mind of its own. All right. I'll have to stay closer to this, I think, to control it. All right. So, you know, if we look at what's gone on in the past 30 years and we look at this impact of personal influence, it's changed dramatically. You know, we can look at print and electronic, editorial and advertising content. That's pretty much stayed the same over the past 30 years in terms of influence, but the level of personal influence, personal advocacy, us talking to one another offline and on, has increased dramatically. These numbers keep going up. Okay. What we know about personal advocacy, and then again, these numbers keep going up. Yankelovich looked at the level of trust that people have in advertising. It's significant. You know, the level has gone down dramatically. The Edelman Trust Barometer, which is worldwide, people trust other people much more than they trust institutions because they have had the rug pulled under them by institutions over the years. And so, you know, they tend to disbelieve, and so this is one of the reasons that advertising over the years has become less effective. It has credibility. Two of the guys that I work with, Ed Keller and Brad Fay, they wrote a book, Ed Keller did, he was co-author of a book called The Influentials. They look at credibility of information that I get from a peer as opposed to what I get from a corporation. I believe it. I believe it. You know, if my brother talks to me about loving to go to Target, calls it Target, and loves to go there and would prefer to go there more than Lowe's or Home Depot, I believe him. You'll believe your friends, you'll believe your colleagues, you'll believe your relatives more than you will believe the institutions. Okay, so this is what we've seen. These are the new realities, the decline in trust, the decline in the power and the influence of advertising. What I was saying is that at lunch, Procter & Gamble, for instance, has diverted 20% of its advertising budget to social media. They've laid off about 1,500 people as a result. There's kind of the prevailing point of view at Procter & Gamble that social media are free, and so, you know, particularly online, so why don't we go after that and save a lot of money? Well, it's yet to be proven. What I've seen a lot of is the fact that if you blend traditional electronic and print with social media, you will be far more effective. Keller and Fay have proven that. We've seen the way that I look at the internet is not so much of a communication medium, of course it is that, it's an enabler. It enables these things to take place. It's a fellow by the name of Andy Cernovitz who started the Word of Mouth Marketing Association. And what he has said is that, you know, the amount of communication attributed to online is vastly overrated. He said, you know, it comes from offline or online and then we can't even follow where it goes. It's like follow the bouncing ball. It ping-pongs all over the place. So again, from our perspective, we're agnostic. We don't care where it comes from. We just recognize that it has to be something that's contemporary and it has to be measurable. So, you know, and we've looked at social networks, but there's a reality. The reality is if I look at where most of the communication takes place, it's still peer-to-peer. Social networks is about third or fourth on the list, way, way lower than peer-to-peer communication. I have those new data that just came out, and it just reconfirms data that I've been seeing for years. So, you know, these are some of the truths. Go back. All right. I like to talk about books a little bit when I'm presenting. You go back to 2000, Malcolm Gladwell, The Tipping Point. This is kind of where it started. You know, everybody started talking about mavens and, you know, other terms for communication. Gladwell was really the first to kind of to codify this and to put his arms around it. And then we started to see, I talked about Hubin McConnell, Evangelism, The Influentials, Ed Keller and John Berry, that book that I talked about, Groundswell, great book, super book. This is what I call, these four books in the middle are kind of what I call outside-in advocacy. This is all of us talking to our friends. This is how the mechanics work. There's also something called inside-out advocacy. I see companies where somebody is the director of customer advocacy who's really responsible for customer service. It's the organization really striving to create a level of stronger interaction, stronger relationships with their customers. So you find people like Glenn Urban who's a marketing professor at MIT, wrote an early book called Don't Just Relate, Advocate. This was a book on online community that I participated in. I wrote the afterword for the book. We've been looking at customer community for probably 12, 15 years now, and it's growing in importance. Buzz marketing, the best book I've seen and one that I recommend to everybody is Firms of Endearment. Run out and get it. Because if you want to understand customer centricity and how companies can get closer to their customers, Raj Sisodia, Wolf, and Jag Desheth, who I'm happy to say is a good friend, and he, I first saw the antecedents for this content in about 2004, and I saw where he was going. How many of you have read Good to Great, the book Good to Great? Many of you have, and for a number of years, that was sort of the archetype. You're good to great, and you've got all these characteristics. You look at the books, you look at the companies that Sheth and his colleagues have identified in this book, you will see dramatically higher performance of their companies compared to the companies identified in Good to Great. And it's because these companies have become more humanistic. They have understood the value of dialogue. They've understood that they've got to have new ways of measuring, new metrics, to better understand how we can leverage this new world that we're in. Okay, what we've seen, as I said, is advocacy has very, very strong support. Very strong support. From, and this is just an example of 3. I've got pages of this from consulting organizations that have been looking at this for the past 5 or 10 years. So advocacy has really come to the point where it is an accepted metric along with SAT, loyalty, retention, recommendation, etc., and is probably more actionable, as you will see in just a couple minutes, than others. There's also a new reality. I was talking about this again at lunch. Hubin McConnell, who wrote the book on customer evangelism, talked about something called the 99-1 rule. The amount of people who are actually contributing content online or then commenting and then lurking or observing. 1%, this goes back to 2006, 1% were contributing, 9% were commenting, 90% were lurkers, observing, not doing anything, just watching the blogs, reading the blogs. Now we've gone to 2011 and it's gone 10, 20, 70. 10% are now contributing, 20% are now commenting, and 70% are now lurking. That's a pretty significant increase in a short number of years. What it shows is that you've got more active participation. This is B2B and B2C, by the way, so you've got more active participation by consumers of all stripes in dialogue. People contributing service information, people contributing experience information, people giving their likes and dislikes, getting on rating services, Amazon, everybody knows these things. There are a lot of rating services, Angie's List, Craigslist, where all of these ratings take place. This is a lot more active in the past 5 years. We have to be aware of it. Okay. So we started looking at the benefits of advocacy, which really kind of boil down to this. We can help define the priorities and action plans to enhance customer experience and drive future behavior. That's the name of the tune. The other name of the tune is we're always talking to companies that want new customer acquisition. This is another way to get it. If I know what it is that I have to do to keep and enhance the loyalty behavior of current customers, then I also know what I can do to start leveraging new customers to come in. All right, so I'm going to dive in a little bit. I'm going to talk about advocacy as a segmentation device. This is kind of where you begin. When you're starting to do metrics work and you're talking about customers, you want to be able to segment them in a very actionable way. How can I use them, these segments, to make marketing decisions? So I want to talk about it as a segmentation device, as a KPI. Everybody familiar with that term? Key performance metric or key performance indicator. And also, and critically, it's also an organizational and a cultural management model. Again, you focus around advocacy, and I've seen organizations do this. The companies that I have on that one page with all of the logos are really strong in doing this. Yeah, they're making money, but they're also doing good things for customers. You know, and it's very strategic. These things go hand in hand. Okay. So we talk about advocacy classification. We ask several questions. Simple, simple. This is our metric that we apply for clients. And we're talking about brand favorability, customer purchase behavior, and also the frequency of positive and negative communication on behalf of a product or service. Simple stuff. There are reasons, by the way, and I can talk to you afterwards, why, you know, we used to ask recommendation. We don't anymore. Recommendation actually lessens the quality of the data that we get. And for those people who are involved in Net Promoter, they may not. Yeah, question?
Do you mean recommendation of the company?
Yeah, or a product. Or a product.
So
Sure.
Calling someone and saying, what do you recommend in this market segment?
Well, the recommendation has to be sort of, I don't ask you for it. It comes, you know, would you recommend? If I'm asking you, would you, that's the way that question works. Would you recommend to somebody else? Yeah. And what happens is that the likelihood, here's the long and the short of it. The likelihood of saying positive or negative things about a product or a service is far more likely, industry to industry, than the likelihood of recommendation. Everybody get that? The likelihood of positive, and I've seen this in every industry, whether it's business to business or business to consumer. I talked about my brother Ron a couple of minutes ago and how he loves Target. You know, but Ron, as Susan, my wife, knows, he's a pretty quiet guy. He won't recommend it. Now, he'll talk about all the great experiences that he's had, but he won't say, you want to go there. That's recommendation, but now he's talked positively about it. That's far more likely to happen, situation to situation, whether you're talking about business to business or business to consumer. I measured this through the Harris poll, and Keller has measured it through TalkTrack. I've seen it measured in a lot of different venues. So, you know, I don't say there's anything wrong with recommendation. It's an okay measure, but there's stronger measures. There's stronger measures. Okay. So, you know, and here's an example of what I'm talking about. This happens to be an IT study, business to business, right? And you can look at the total population, things that were positively said, things that were negatively said for Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, and IBM. Now you look at the advocates, the way that we have identified them after we ask several questions. Look at the positives and the negatives. No negatives, all positives. Question? Yes, ma'am.
What's recommendation? So are you saying that the recommendation depends on what relationship you have with the person who's recommending? So for example, we just recommended the both farms and the deal.
Yeah.
So if I don't really know you, I might not be inclined to.
Correct. It's one of the challenges with that particular metric. You know, we talked a little bit earlier when we talked about advocacy, about credibility. You know, and so if I don't know you, one of the things about recommendation, by the way, and just in passing, it can be bought. And there are whole industries around, you know, for giving you incentives to recommend to somebody else. So its veracity, its truthfulness, its honesty is open to some question, it's fair to say. It's a good question. Okay, so, you know, this is what we've seen when we look at advocacy. I'll go to banks, okay? Here we've identified 3 different banks, A, B, and C, right? There's a 13% advocacy level at Bank A, 27% at Bank B, 37% at Bank C. Look at the difference in share of wallet, customer retention, and new client growth. And what I said about those 4 segments is you've got what I call, you know, what we in research we would call polarity and slope. Between the top group and the bottom group, just like we saw on the last slide, right? You got big polarity here, huge polarity. The advocates are very positively and speaking frequently, and there's no negativity coming from any of these people, right? Okay. So, you know, and what we've seen here is if I look at KPIs, performance indicators in many industries are share of wallet, share of customer, share of market. Here we're looking at share of wallet, customer retention, and new client growth. It absolutely goes along, right? It works very well. Key metric. Here is a supermarket chain. Happens to be Tesco, for work that we did in the UK. And look at the difference. Look at the difference. So we can look at, you know, as advocacy goes up, retention goes up, share of wallet goes up. Nice. This becomes a key metric. And I can plan around this, and I can do simulations. What does it take to increase the level of advocacy? if I can increase it, what are the dollars that I'm going to accrue out of this? And I can, I can do this through simulation very easily. So, we've created something, we've created this advocacy ladder. The whole notion is that we want to be able to, the best way to explain this is that if we're talking about the bottom two groups, ambivalent to alienated, if somebody is indifferent about a company, they may be lured away by prices. They may be lured away, because of bad service. Anything can happen, right? We want to be able to identify these people and stabilize them. That's critical. And I see it missing from most market research studies. They don't really give adequate direction. The Allegiant, that's my brother Ron. I want Ron to be more vocal. I'd love to have Ron go out and recommend Target. Because if he did, he would probably buy there more often, as well as influence others to do the same thing. So how do we bootstrap people up from Allegiant to Advocate? Right, very clear. All right, so we can look at things like the influence of different markers. And one of the ones that I use is perceived performance change over time. A lot of market researchers never ask this, by the way. It's often missing from market research studies that I see, but I think it's critical. If I have been a customer of a company, let's say Comcast, for a year, have I seen improvements in Comcast service or the array of products that they offer me? I can say the same thing about my bank. I can say the same thing about my auto dealership. I can say the same thing about big box retailers and supermarkets. I can say the same thing if it's a B2B situation. I can do it for any industry. What I'm able to see is that advocacy is a marker for perceived change in performance over time. There's a direct connection. Okay? Now I'm going to get slightly technical, very slightly technical. There is a device that we use called DFA, discriminant function analysis. And basically what it is we call it a butterfly chart. And we're able to look at all of the diagnostics, all of the attributes that we measure for a company's performance and say, which are the ones that are going to most influence positive behavior, that's the blue. In other words, move people from Allegiant to the top group. Which are the ones that if we don't make change are going to contribute to potential churn of that customer. That's the red. And we can do this, 50, 60, however many attributes we're measuring for a client. And I'll give you a very simple one here. This happens to be a business-to-business client in the temporary professional employment services business. And we have been doing work for this company for 10 years. And in 2010, we started to look at customer advocacy for the first time. Now, they've been doing satisfaction measurement. That was their key performance metric. That was what they, eventually they went to a customer loyalty index, which is kind of the next step up, where you're looking at, purchase, we're looking at SAT, we're looking at recommendation, typically those three. Now here, we're just looking at advocacy. All of their diagnostics over the years have kind of flatlined, nothing changed. Nothing really changed. For the first time, they saw that if we focused here, anticipates your future needs. In other words, if this company got more embedded in their clients' own businesses and understood those businesses better, they were going to drive a lot stronger behavior. So we could say to that company, look, take your scarce resources, don't worry about these other things, don't drop the ball, but don't worry about these other things so much. Focus here, and they did. Dramatic increases in sales, dramatic increases in profitability. That's a reorientation to a degree of the structure. It's a reorientation of the culture. It's reorientation of HR, of training, a lot of things, right? Certainly a reorientation of their marketing. So this is an example. All right. And we can do this, in any area. This happens to be banking branch service, knowledge and expertise of the staff, very key and very leveraging. On the other hand, if the waiting time is too long, we all know this. You we've all gone into banks and sat and waited for that customer service person. It's just like sitting on the phone and, you know, calling your HMO, or sitting on the phone and talking to your cable tech support, or talking to the tech support folks for your laptop, right? It's a killer. It's an absolute killer. So, you know, these are the kinds of things, of all the things, and again, we probably took 25 or 30 diagnostics and compressed them to 4. These are the things that the company could focus on. Okay. I also look, by the way, at expressed and unexpressed complaints. Now, I talk to a lot of customer service directors and managers, and they think they're hearing all the complaints that exist. Here's the reality. In business to consumer situations, about 2 to 5% of all the complaints that are out there are actually ever registered with customer service. In business to business, it's about 40 to 60% because the relationships are usually closer and stronger. So what happens is that if I'm customer service, I'm missing a lot of this stuff. And if I don't ask it in the market research study, I'm never going to find out. In other words, you need a full reservoir, if you like. You know, you've got kind of the typical iceberg situation in most complaint management systems that I see, where it's 2 to 5 to 10% of the ice that's sitting above the water, and the rest of it is below the water, and you can't see it. So you got to ask. And what you typically find is that it has a dramatic influence. You know, first of all, look at the way that it's handled, positively, neutrally, and negatively. You know, that has a tremendous influence on recommendation and continued use. But then what about the complaints that are not registered? If I can't get those complaints surfaced, the likelihood is that it's going to have a tremendous impact on continued use and recommendation. The answer is you got to surface them, and this is the place to do it. So you find out what they are. You also find out why they haven't been surfaced, but then you can kind of take care of them pretty quickly. You know, these are just some data, incidental data that I want to show you, and then I'm going to go to some examples. You know, here are the differences between advocates and alienateds, and look at the differences in things like share of wallet. We happen to do this in the UK and Singapore. Look at the differences in share of wallet, retention, word of mouth, positive versus negative. Then we start looking at diagnostics, you know, the kinds of things that contribute to these overall metrics. Trust and confidence, service from staff, breadth of accounts. The other thing that we see is that the more problems that you have, the more likely you are to be alienated, particularly if they're not resolved, like we just saw. So we can do this, you know, here's B2B, and the same thing is pretty much true in B2C. I can get even more detailed. I won't bore you with it, but the fact is that I can do this for hours. This is the kind of stuff that we see. And we've seen it on every continent. We've seen it in just about every industry that you can name. There are dramatic differences group to group to group. Okay. Now what I want to do is go quickly to some examples. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're good. Okay. Wow, we're all right. Okay. All right. I'm going to move very quickly. These are examples that come from different industries real fast. Okay? This happens to be a national health club chain. I visited this health club chain when I first started to do the work. And what I saw were trainers wearing garb from competing health chains. I saw trainers walking around not caring, not paying any attention. They had real problems, these guys. So, you know, what we did is advocacy research. They were getting lower membership, they were getting a lot of turnover, and you know, fewer new membership, as I said. So we also did something called staff mirroring research, where we asked the employees what they thought the customers would say, and they totally disagreed. They thought they were doing great. They thought it was okay to wear competitive garb in the facility. That was okay. And the organization thought that as long as there was plentiful equipment and it was clean, that was fine. That's all they needed to do. Wrong, wrong, wrong. We ended up that we had to do staff relationship training. That was extremely important to the customers. More scheduling and training variety. They didn't offer martial arts, for example. They didn't offer yoga. You know, these are the kinds of things that they needed to do. Better handling and resolution of member issues. They never interacted with the members very much. So it ended up being very strongly staff-focused. A lot of these things are, and it ended up being a major change for the organization. B2B. This is computer service in 60 different countries. And this is an organization that used to focus on customer sat. That's all they cared about. Now we looked at, in all these countries, all the different channels, whether it was online, phone, however the message came in, however it was handled. We had to really, this is an organization that mandated becoming world-class, not just in the computer industry, but world-class via any industry, okay? And so, what we did was a major overhaul of service processes. Here's what it boiled down to. And it's kind of like I showed you for the temporary employment company. If you call your computer service organization, what we found is you don't just want the problem handled, you want that rep to own it. You want that rep to own it. It's my problem. I'm wearing it like a coat. It's personal. And that's what we found that, business to business, that these customers, these clients wanted. It meant a major change. They couldn't be reactive anymore. They had to be far more proactive and understand that laptop or that PC owner's business, and what the issues were, and how, what downtime really meant, and how it had to be fixed. So the detail was really important. The devil is often in the details of these things. That was certainly true here. So we ended up major overhaul of service processes. It's not that their people were not proficient. They absolutely were. We had to take them the next step. If they really wanted to be able to move out from the vast majority of companies, and this company is fairly customer-centric, how to go further, how to go further. That was the mandate from the CEO, and we made it happen. Last example, financial services company. Here, they wanted to change the nature of the relationship for clients that had portfolios of under $250,000. They said, finances, the way finances, the economics worked out, we simply could not provide individual broker support for somebody with that low a level of portfolio. So we put them into a financial account center. It's taking something away from the client, in other words. It's kind of like telling you, guess what? Your airline loyalty program now says that you need 40,000 miles instead of 20,000 miles in order to qualify for a free ticket. You take something away from a customer, and you gotta replace it with something that is seen as equal or better value. This all rested with communication. It rested with rep behavior and training, and that's where we focused. More personalization of the touch points, delivering on the promises made, particularly around time, more regular outbound communication, advisor training. Again, this personalization comes through again and again and again and again. So, they said, we will give you advisory services. We have to be clear with you about this. We have to be honest with you. We simply can't afford to give you to an individual broker. You're going to go into a pool. But if you want advisory services, it's a fee-paid basis. Some of the computer companies have gone to something similar. It's also the kind of thing that you see with doctors now, with concierge services, where you pay a fee for that service. Same kind of thing. You're seeing it in a lot of areas of product and service delivery. It has to be measured, though. And the advocacy was able to find this out. Okay. So, what I said at the outset is every time something has kind of annoyed me or bothered me a lot, I've written a book. Customer retention was the difference between retention and SAT. Customer loyalty pyramid was all about architecture and engineering. Customer win-back was looking at the back end of the customer life cycle. I find a lot of companies miss that. They don't know how to stabilize customers. They don't know what to do with customers when they've gone, but there are attractive financial opportunities. And my colleague Jill Griffin and I wrote a whole book about this because it was important. One Customer Divisible, as Matt said, is all about customer metrics. And it's how companies like, you know, I mentioned at launch Royal Bank of Canada. They started from 10 customer segments a few years ago. They now have 20,000 customer segments. So that if you are a snowbird who lives in Montreal most of the year and you happen to go to Boca Raton, Florida for the winter, they will have absolute personalized financial services for you there in Boca Raton. They don't want to lose the relationship. And they can, you know, there may be only 200 people in their whole database who are like that out of the millions that they have. They can take care of them. That's customer centricity. So, you know, I focused on that kind of thing in one customer division. And then the last one was about customer advocacy versus customer sabotage. I want to leave you with this because I think this is important and it kind of underscores everything I've been talking about. You know, Pepperson Rogers is very advanced in this field, very well respected. And for the first time in 2011, they started looking at customer advocacy and they actually wrote a white paper about it. The benefits of building advocacy can't be ignored. Satisfaction and loyalty are important, but they're old news. We're talking about what it is that measures as a KPI the impact of customer experience. We're talking about leveraging customer advocacy. Why? Because you're going to generate higher sales and higher profitability. That is the entire name of the tune, and that's why we focused on it. We believe it's contemporary. I mean, you know, this is our stuff. You can talk with another market research organization, they'll have a different point of view. This is our stuff. We've proven this. We've seen it. We think it works, and we've seen it in just about every company. That's, as they say in comedy, that's my time.